Hey, welcome back to the show. This is episode number 24, part 3 of 6 with Dr. Matthew DeMond. And this episode is going over the growth mindset, talking about how to develop habits and have a deliberate practice that you can do every single day to help you move from one step to the next. It also covers time being the most valuable resource and how if it's not the right fit for you right now, then just cut off whatever you're doing. Cut your losses and move on to the thing that's going to help you go to the next level or do that next project you've always wanted to do.
There's something called the sunk cost fallacy. Are you familiar with this?
No, I'm not, but I'm going to write this down. The sunk cost fallacy.
So the sunk cost fallacy is this idea where when a person devotes a lot of time, money, or otherwise resources, that you put that into something, we're really likely to use it or to either focus or otherwise define ourselves in that way.
Sure.
So think of it this way, and I think you're actually a really interesting example here. Most chiropractors will say go to school and they're there for 4 years and they drop $200,000 on an education, and because they've submitted that much time, money, energy, resources into that degree program, what are you going to do when you're done? You're going to become a chiropractor,
right?
So, it's because you have so much invested,
right?
But what did you do?
Not that.
Something else.
Something else. Yeah, exactly.
But it's really interesting because, a lot of people will define themselves by those pursuits that they spend a significant amount of resources on.
Right. And so with the sunk cost, I think that applies across everything, right? Everybody, it's almost like confirmation bias in the fact that you believe something yourself, and it doesn't matter what anybody tells you, what evidence you get, you're just so locked into that. But I think if you talk back about sunk cost, fallacy, my problem with the reason that I didn't kind of stick in that space there the way that, traditionally would be done is the why wasn't big enough for me. Mm. And so I kind of go back to that and I say, listen, you can only have so much impact treating patients, right? And there's not to put down anything that anybody's doing in that space, but for me, I was interested in how can I do more, right? So now a lot of our focus is on how can we have exposure in the healthcare space between businesses, educators, and practice members. Because at the end of the day, if you never bring new things to providers, the care never changes for patients. So I would much rather be one step above treating patients one-to-one and go 1 to 1,000 different doctors and offer them an opportunity to either have a new product, a new service, or a new way to do things, because then I go 1 to 1,000 to 1,000,000, mm-hmm. Which my why in my mind, maybe this is just made up, but in my mind, I think that that's a bigger approach and a bigger touch or a bigger footprint on the planet than just saying I'm treating one-to-one. And for some people, that's totally okay, right? It's like the yes men. They go to work and they want to do this one thing and they never want to push the boundaries, right? For me, I look at it and say, you can always make the money back. You can't get the time back, but you can always get the money back. And the time you spent learning something, that knowledge, no one ever said you got to put it in this box and use it this way. Mm-hmm. Break it apart and use it however you see fit. Education, working on, coming up with better ideas. If you come up with products, just solve problems. Mm-hmm. If you're solving a problem, people will pay you for it and they will appreciate you way more than anything else, right? And so in education, the problem you're solving is lack of knowledge. But education looks like this for most people. For you, it's like, right? Just like this huge explosion of how many different things can we put together so that we don't have to play in the sandbox the same way. And that's what you're not going to get from most people, right? That's top 1% type stuff. That's not average, right? So I think I agree with you 100% that sunk cost is a big factor for a lot of people.
Yeah. And as it pertains to, that growth mindset, one of the things we need to constantly be reminding ourselves of and be careful of is that, just because we've invested that time doesn't mean we can't change. Right. What we see is people will put a lot of resources into getting somewhere that they think is appropriate in their life. And then they get to the other end and, they realize like, oh, well, I've invested this, so now I have to do it this way. The way I teach it to my students is, in the chiropractic field, we have this conundrum of an overabundance of specialty certifications and ways to treat people. So So what we see is, as providers, we don't actually distinguish ourselves based on, the patients that we provide. You have a heart problem, you have a lung problem, you have a, whatever. Like, that's not our specialty. As chiropractors, our specialty is in the service that we provide. So what you see is that the niche chiropractor is actually the one who provides active release technique, or NIMO, or AK, or Graston, or whatever. And that's how we define ourselves. Well, hey, chiropractic didn't work for you because you went to a NIMO provider. That's why you need to come and see me, because I do it differently. And I think that really, from a personal professional standpoint, I think that really dilutes what chiropractic is and what we're able to do as a profession. But I think there's a bigger concept to be looking at here. That happens across the field. People in other industries and professions, and certainly with entrepreneurs who are looking to be innovative with their pursuits. You put time, energy, and resources into something, so much so that, like, you kind of get married to it, and you're not willing to let it go.
You won't adapt. You won't change. You won't go to that next step because you're so invested. But interesting you say that, because I think you would challenge the concept of doing something just because you did it before, right? Like, just because you went to school doesn't mean that has to be your ultimate outcome. But one of the things that I think, and this is just a personal opinion, but I think people do a lot of weird things for money. And the reason I say that is because a lot of people will think that they're going to go to school for 4 years and spend this money to get a ticket to go make more money, or make their life easier, or have a great outcome, or a beautiful house, or a car, or whatever stupid materialistic thing that they want, right? You can want whatever you want, but the problem is that people believe that it's an investment, in that you just get it back, right? You spend the 200 in the 4 years, you get it back tenfold, right? And that's just not the way the world works, right? When you leave school is when the work begins. And that's when nobody's patient now. So you see all these people who are 25 to 30 years old, maybe even younger, that are like, oh, I want to get to the top right now. Well, that's not how it works, right? You have to go through these steps. And if you want to go to the next level, you're going to have to think outside the box. You're going to have to work a little longer. You're going to have to work a little harder. You're going to have to work a little smarter. And hey, guess what? There's going to be some sacrifice along the way, whatever that is, right? And so I think a lot of people are very uncomfortable with trying to pursue something greater because they're not willing to sacrifice at the bottom. They just aren't. They just go, listen, I want to drive my, C-class Mercedes right out of chiropractic school. And now you're tied to your job because you have a $600 lease payment on your car.
Yeah. Well, to that point, I would say, I would caution and say, you don't have to sacrifice at the bottom. I would try to avoid that, as something to put out there. I think it was Simon Sinek. He talks about the millennial generation, and that whole instant gratification thing, and what we've seen over the decades is all these millennials coming of age who are getting into industry and starting their careers, and they want that purpose and that meaning, and they want it right now.
Right.
What they've lost, and by no fault of their own, what they've lost is the ability to be engaged in the process.
Right.
They don't know how to be bored.
Right. Patience is really a troubling thing. I think more what I was saying about the sacrifice side is that there's this balance of sacrifice and entitlement, right? There's this, I finished chiropractic school, so I get X. And that's just not the way it works, right? At the end of the day, the world is a very complex place. And I think if you go through those stages of working hard to better yourself over and over and over, eventually it works. Eventually you get better, right? If you look at last year, this time, you would probably say that you are better today than you were 365 days ago. Mm-hmm. It's continuous improvement, right? But a lot of people don't do that step. They don't push themselves that hard. They just kind of flat line or get just incremental. They don't want to go for that huge push. I don't know what your thoughts are on that, but that's just what I've observed a little bit recently.
Well, again, I think unfortunately it's because, society over the last couple of decades has trained people this way with the advancements and improvements in technology. they put everything right at our fingertips. We get we get that same kind of sense of purpose, of value, of meaning every time. Every time somebody watches our TikTok video or like the Instagram post,
right.
And we get excited about those things, and we're looking for that same kind of feedback in our work lives as well. So when we go to work and we have to work for 8 hours a day, or we have to do that, for 48, 52 weeks a year, and at the end of it, nobody's, like patting us on the back or, saying congratulations all the time for that effort. It's a system that's distinct and separate from what we've been exposed to previously. We're constantly getting that feedback of, look how amazing our world and society is, and everybody's giving us these accolades. But we've never really taken the time to say, how did we get from point A to point B? What there's what is it? I'm gonna mess this quote up. It's such a cheesy quote from hold on, an Ashton Kutcher and Brittany Murphy movie. I think it's Just Married, and the whole movie is based on the premise that this newlywed couple goes on a European honeymoon, and it's just an absolute shit show. Sorry for saying that.
No, that's all good. It's all good.
It's so bad. And at the end of it, Ashton Kutcher's character is coming to his dad, and they're going through a photo album, and he says something to the effect of, it's time to grow up. Life is what happens from one happy snapshot to the next.
Right.
And it was just such a powerful comment that, like, we try to highlight and look at and immortalize all these really happy moments in our life. But, what happens from point to point is all that stuff in between, the trouble, the toil, and like what you were saying, the sacrifices. How do you get there? What do you deal with?
Right. And I think that is, you made that comment about you don't always have to sacrifice at the bottom. And I think that's super true. What I think a lot of people don't do is they don't look at it and say, what do I actually want to get out of this? Right. They just go, I'm just doing stuff. I'm just show up every day and do stuff. But the people who have a goal that is bigger than just themselves or bigger than just their family, these massive goals, they look at it and say, yeah, I'm not doing Friday nights. I'm not doing Saturday nights for the next 5 years, because when I'm 30, I want to have an impact that's huge, right? Mm-hmm. And that's the level of personal sacrifice that people have for their work or for the future or for the people. And it's really interesting because, people sacrifice things for their spouses and their families all the time. But then when it comes to work sacrifice, you're actually sacrificing something for yourself, just yourself in 5 years. And so people look at it and say, I don't want to do that. I'm sacrificing it for my boss. No, you're not doing it for your boss. You're not doing it for anyone else but yourself. You're going to eat shit for 5 years. And when you come out the other side, you're going to be a better person because you went through all of these difficulties, right? I've learned more in the last 12 months on business than I could ever learn in Business 101 or any course anywhere. And that's just because I just got kicked in the teeth for 12 months trying to figure out how to run a business. Right. And so people say, oh, well, there's, what kind of sacrifice is there? Well, here's the sacrifice. I work 15 hours a day. I work every weekend. I'm on planes in 42 different states this year. Right. That takes me away from other things in my personal life, but I'm sacrificing it now because I believe that what we're going to do in the future is going to be bigger than just me. That's the belief. And maybe that's the wrong belief. But at the end of the day, it's like you sit there and you get kicked in the teeth and you go, dang, this sucks, but you got to get back up tomorrow and you got to do it again. And you do that over and over again, and eventually it becomes easier and easier. And I think a lot of people, they get kicked once and they go, I'm done. I don't want to do it, right? They go, this sucks, I'm done, right? And I think everybody's had those days. Doesn't matter where you're at in your life. You have those days where you sit there and you go, I'm pretty sure I can't do tomorrow. I can't do the next day. I can't do the next thing. And it feels like that, but here's the thing. You go to sleep, you wake up tomorrow, it's there. So just do it. You know what I mean? Just go out there and don't worry so much about it, because at the end of the day, if it was easy, everyone would do it. That's just straight up.
Yep. Habits are the compound interest in self-improvement.
There you go. Exactly. Right. And that's the thing, is like, when you talk about patience, right? That's like the Gary Vaynerchuk type way, right? He says, you're just young, right? That's the way it is. Patience is key. If you do the habits every single day and you're expecting 20 to 21 to be a difference, you're going to lose every time. Because it's 21 to 31 where the difference is made. It's not tomorrow. And so a lot of people let themselves down because their expectations are up here. Reality hits and there's this gap and you're like, okay, well, there's my happiness gap and I have no happiness because I'm expecting the world and I'm not getting any of it. But the problem is you measured that within this sliver of time, which is 1 year or 6 months. You got to measure that over 20 years or 30 years, right? And say, how can I build health, wealth, and happiness over time? And you just can't do that in 6 months. It just doesn't work. So I think that's where people get, like you're talking about habits. You got to build the habit every day.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So now we're getting to high level stuff. Really high level stuff.
Yeah, there was only one other thing that I wanted to talk about and see where it went.
Yeah.
When it comes to bettering yourself and developing a growth mindset, one of the things that comes to mind is there's this MMA trainer named Frank Shamrock who has this what he calls the plus, minus, and equal system.
Okay.
And basically, to become great, you need to find a person who you can learn from. So somebody who's better than you. You need somebody who's lesser than you so that you can practice teaching and actually, exercise that. But you also need to find somebody who's equal to you so that you can constantly be challenging yourself.
Interesting. That is a very interesting way to look at it. And I think people have that in their life. They just don't recognize it. That's what I would say is that, at the end of the day, there's always somebody who's better, smarter, happier, makes more money, is more accomplished than you. There's always people who are below you on that scale. And then there's a great mix of people in that middle percent, because you got that bell curve, right? That kind of average. And the further, I would say for sure, the further you go to the right on the bell curve, the less people you're going to have that are in that equal section, meaning that it's very hard to continue to go forward because you believe that there's this scarcity mindset that you can't actually get to that next level, right? There's this, I think Dan Pena, he says, show me your friends and I'll show you your future.
Yeah.
Right. And it's true, because as you go through this entrepreneurship journey or this growth mindset journey or this personal growth journey, I think a lot of people aren't willing to let go of some things. There's going to be the people and the processes and the things you do every day that need to be eliminated to get to the next step. Do you need to check your phone 5,000 times a day? No. Do you need to reply to every email right now? No. Right? Do you need to stay up and watch 17 episodes of Netflix, or could you maybe do 3? Right? There's some other things, right? And if you go kind of to Gary Vaynerchuk again, he talks about a huge thing in growth mindset and this plus minus that you're talking about right now. And he says, if you compare yourself to somebody else, you're going to lose every time because you have no idea where they're at on that line. You just don't. So with what you're talking about, this plus, minus, and equal, you better choose that equal very humbly, because if you choose that person way below you or way above you, you're going to be disappointed all the time, right? So I think that's probably the hardest selection. It's not hard to find someone who's way better than you. That is not hard, right? We can always do that. And there's always someone who's way worse off than you. But finding that person that you think is equal, that's got to be tough.
Yeah. So from a training perspective, one of the things that I really like about that concept is, you really should pursue to have all 3 of those people in your wheelhouse.
Yeah.
You want that mentor who's above you that you can constantly kind of like model and learn from. You need that person who is your equal so they can constantly be pushing you and give you just a consistent challenge.
Yeah.
But having those people that are lesser than you, it's about acknowledging opportunities, right?
Yes.
If you have people who are lesser than you who are pulling you down, that's a very different dynamic than somebody who's lesser than you, that you're using it as an opportunity to now bring them up, because to them you're their plus.
Their plus. That's exactly it.
Yeah. So if you're engaged in relationships and like, again, to answering that question of why, if you're engaged in a relationship and you're using an opportunity with somebody who's maybe not at your level yet, to really hone your own skills and see what you have, what you are able to develop from a teaching perspective, that's a really good opportunity to hone your skills.
Yeah.
They say everybody in some regard is a teacher. And it doesn't matter if you're 80 or 12. You used the example earlier about TikTok.
Yeah.
And I guarantee every 16-year-old out there knows how to use TikTok in circles around either of us.
Yeah,
And,
exactly.
With that in mind, it doesn't matter how old you are, what your other life experiences are. In certain categories, you are going to be the expert. And
yes.
On the other end of that, we need to be able to be humbled and willing to receive that information to ultimately make better peoples of ourselves.
Yeah, no, that's a really interesting concept. And I think if you look at it long term too, people are more and more so, I think, in the pursuit of greatness now. I think before, because everyone wasn't so connected with the internet and these social platforms, people wouldn't have anything to compare to. But now I think if you have the right growth mindset, you look at these people, these pluses, as you say, in your life, what's that plus in your life? And try and say, how can I get to that level? How do I get to that person?
Mm-hmm.
Whereas, 20 years ago, you didn't have that access to see the potential mentors in your life, right? And the mentors don't have to be people you talk to directly. I think there's a lot of, maybe you're a Gary Vee fan and you want to strive to be that. Maybe you're a Grant Cardone fan and you want to be that. Maybe you're looking at BJ Palmer in the chiropractic space and you want to look at that. Those can all be mentors if you've never actually talked to them, because you consume the content, you chop it all up, you learn from it, you make an adjustment, and you get better tomorrow. And that's where I think the more pluses you have in your life, the better. You just have to have them. There's just no other way.
Yeah. And I want to speak to, speak to that, acknowledgement of like what you're actually doing. I think it's important to talk about just briefly about deliberate practice. Can you break down the different sub skills that are like domain specific, and not just, spending time on a task as part of your performance?
Right.
So the two analogies that I use with my students is, one is, if you want to get better at something, you have to practice it. You can't just do it. Think about how many hours you spend typing on your keyboard or computer, but you don't ever get any faster.
Yeah. Right.
Right.
Because you don't practice.
Because you don't practice. You don't practice those fundamental skills that actually makes you be a better typist, so that you actually improve that as a skill.
Right.
When it comes to adjusting, again, here specific to the chiropractic world, when it comes to adjusting, adjusting your patients, treating your patients, like that's game day. That's performance stuff.
Yeah.
That's not your area to practice. That's high stakes. You're dealing with patients' health.
Yeah.
You need to give yourself low stakes situations that allows you to fail and really adapt that growth mindset, so that you can learn where you're weak, improve upon it, and then apply it when the time comes.
Right.
So I tell all of my students, like, look, regardless of whether you are working on your adjusting skills today, or maybe some of your diagnostic skills, you don't wait until that patient walks in your door. I tell every one of my students, every patient with low back pain needs to have an abdominal exam. Not because I think that they actually have an abdominal problem, but because I need to rule it out as a competing diagnosis or associated things.
Right.
If a student, or if a practitioner takes it upon themselves after a history to say, oh, well, it doesn't sound like it's anything abdominal, so I don't need to assess it. If you take that skill away and you don't practice, I've palpated thousands of abdomens and done tens of thousands of abdominal exams, and I know what normal feels like.
Right.
Because I felt normal that many times. And on the couple of instances where something else felt abnormal, every single time when I've sent them out for imaging, it's come back with something.
Right.
Because I've practiced when it didn't matter, so that when it did matter, I was able to find it.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's self discipline, really, right? You got to have the discipline to wake up every day and say, I'm going to practice something that I think I'm already good at, but I could be better at. Because you can't practice everything all the time. So you have to be selective with that. And that's a very specific case of where you're practicing, right? And at the end of the day, you probably know more than 99.9% of the chiropractic profession on palpating abdomens, right? I can't say that I have any experience in that. You know what I mean? But you've taken it upon yourself to learn that skill and get good at it. And so now I could go feel it and I'd have no idea compared to you.
Well,
you know what I mean?
Back to some of our earlier points. One of the things, as in, with the educator mindset, when I went into school and as I move forward, everything that I do personally in clinical practice has been to set me up as an educator. And one of the things I need to teach my students is you need to know how to do this, and here's the reason why.
The reason why, yeah.
Yeah, I was actually in a declaratory ruling hearing where one of the chiropractors who was being questioned said to the board of examiners, "I do not perform any vital signs in my visits." And to me, that broke my heart, because to not do what I would consider minimum competency, health screen or examination for every patient that comes into the office is really to cheapen their experience. So
yeah, it's very interesting. It's a crazy world out there. I mean, it's you look back and you get experience, and you kind of test yourself against the norm and test your mindset against the norm. And I feel like now more than ever, you start to realize how little we know about everything. Mm-hmm. Right? We think the specialists in podiatry know 6 inches of the body. Right? The specialists in chiropractic try to learn the spine, right? Plus, other things, but let's just say the spine to keep it simple. The cardiologists learn the 6 inches of the heart, right? The problem is that it doesn't matter how deep and how narrow you go, you can never know everything. And if you try to come back up from that narrow and deep mindset, there's too many things to learn. So the question becomes, where do you want to focus?
Yeah, that's it. No, that's a great point. I think that's we need both kinds of people in our world. Yes. We need those specialists that obsess over content so much that they're almost blinded to other things.
Right.
But because they're so obsessed with it, they're really able to push the envelope of what our current understanding and knowledge is. Yeah. I mean, that's really the idea behind a PhD program, right?
Right.
You go to a PhD and you become obsessed with one very specific question that needs answered, and you add a little blip to our current existing field of knowledge. Right. And then all the other PhDs all over the world in the same 5-year time are investigating similar things.
Right.
And after 10 or 20 years, the culmination of those efforts becomes, here's a chapter in a book that now an undergrad is reading. And 20 years later, that chapter gets condensed into a paragraph. And then 20 more years later, it's such common knowledge now that it's one sentence.
Yeah.
And that's how we push education forward. We need those specialists to really drive it home. So I applaud anybody who's willing to dedicate their life to that.
Right.
So I say there's room for everybody. Be that specialist and understand that that's going to be your pursuit, or back it up and be a little bit more of a generalist.